1995, a 14-year-old girl went missing since she was last seen getting off a school bus on 9th Street at Pacific Avenue, in Bremerton, on her way home on February 2, 1995. I look at a lot of missing persons cases, and this one has really stuck with me. Today, we're looking into the disappearance of Chalisa Lewis. Chalisa Lewis was born on November 29, 1980, in Bremerton, Washington. She was living together with her mother and grandmother, and it looks like Chalisa's mom has been married and divorced once or twice. Lewis was an 8th grader at Bremerton Junior High School, where she was described as a joyous girl who was loved by both her teachers and classmates. She loved God and writing poetry, despite being introverted in nature. Overall, she seemed like a totally normal teen. Despite her young age, Lewis was really independent and responsible. She liked getting herself up for school. She followed her usual routine. Bus ride home was typical, as any other day. On the morning of February 2, 1995, was supposed to be a perfectly ordinary day for little Lewis, but the nightmare only got worse from there. On the early afternoon of February 2, 1995, Lewis stepped off her Bremerton Junior High School bus at 9th Street and Pacific Avenue, in a small quiet neighborhood. She walked a block and a half to her grandmother's home on Cogian Avenue, and left her school bag at her grandmother's, and was not seen again. No one would have imagined that it would be the last time that Lewis would ever be seen alive again. 14-year-old Chalisa Lewis, a teenage girl from Bremerton, Washington, who had her whole life ahead of her before she totally vanished. And her mysterious disappearance started right here. The search for Lewis became an immediate concern for the entire community. At the time of this incident, Lewis's close group of friends at school were hanging flyers in the neighborhood, in the hopes that the girl might still be found alive. According to witnesses recall that, on her way to her grandmother's home on Cogian Avenue, she was walking with two of her friends, both of whom lived on the same neighborhood with Lewis at the time. Lewis went home, while her two friends went to a nearby store. On the way back, as they were passing Lewis's house, they saw a note that Chalisa left, writing that she would be back in a couple hours. Lewis's grandma, who she lived with, had a small chalkboard outside of her home, to where people could leave notes and stuff. Lewis wrote on there though that she would be back in a couple hours, as if she would go somewhere, but no one actually knows where she was going, which obviously, she never came back. She left a note with an inscription, "I would be back in a couple of hours," but she didn't say where, or with whom. Some had even said that, on the day of her disappearance, she had gotten into a car of an unidentified man, so if it was indeed something that had to do with her murder, obviously, whoever she got into a car with was at least 16 years old. Legal driving age here in Washington state, back in 1995. But even so, I don't know if any of this had anything to do with the case. Some witnesses who lived nearby, that had been to come up with some theories at the time. People began to ask question, why Lewis got into a car of an unidentified man, so bluntly without any doubt, which raised suspicions that the man could be an acquaintance of Lewis. There were many details yet to be added to this case, but others say the opposite, and that, the afternoon that Chalisa disappeared, there was this one woman, who lived on the same block as Chalisa's family did, that reportedly witnessed her getting into a car with some men. In a car described as a hatchback, or Barracuda type, with a light blue top, and turquoise bottom. This woman reportedly saw something, as she was getting ready to go somewhere with her kids, and got into her car, and started chasing after this car up Cogian Avenue and Pacific Avenue, down 11th Street, and onto Kitsap Way, before she had to call off her chase, since she had her own kids in the car, and this particular car that Lewis was apparently in, was running red lights to get away. Afterwards, this woman reportedly was trying to contact the Bremerton Police Department numerous times, but they never answered her calls, until, a week later, and even then, it never looked like the police department followed up on this. This woman reportedly had a partial license plate number, but nothing ever came back to this type of vehicle. She may have been too far away to accurately see it. It would be interesting to know though, if anyone else living around the neighborhood witnessed a vehicle similar to this one at the time of Chalisa's disappearance. There was abundant evidence, given by witnesses at the time, but none of these were clearly identified at all. With the disappearance of this baffling case, when a child goes missing from a tight-knit community, it throws their family and neighbors into a frenzy. Since Louis got off her school bus, and walked the block and a half to her grandmother's home, and left her backpack on the porch of her grandma's house, and then, suddenly disappeared into thin air. Several weeks after her disappearance, Bremerton police canvassed the Cogian Avenue neighborhood, digging for clues, and dusting for fingerprints. The FBI helped with out-of-area contacts, and a spot on America's Most Wanted dared to help find the girl. The search was immediately launched with the authorities and police officers to find her. But at this point, no clues had been found. The frantic search ended, until late February, 1995. The girl's body was found, by a passerby, on a beach below the park bluffs. The remains were hidden beneath sand and debris, at Discovery Park in Seattle, Washington. It was not clear how long the body had been there. The body found in Seattle's Discovery Park was of a partially clothed female, and had no identification. The King County Medical Examiner's Office was comparing dental and medical records to determine whether a body found at Discovery Park was that of a missing 14-year-old Bremerton girl. Washington State Patrol lab technicians were at the girl's home to dust for fingerprints, which may help identify the body, Bremerton police said. On February 28, 1995, the King County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the body of a young girl found in Seattle was that of Chalisa Lewis, who had been missing since February 2nd. Undoubtedly, her death was quickly ruled as a homicide, with the authorities immediately starting an investigation to find her killer. Based on the autopsy report, it was determined that her death was a homicide by saltwater drowning. Police believe she may have been abducted by someone she knew, because there was no sign of struggle in the area she was last seen. Bremerton police believe somebody she knew abducted her. Her backpack was in her grandmother's Cogian Avenue home. There was no sign of a struggle. Bremerton police and agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation had interviewed friends, relatives, and neighbors of Lewis. But police had unearthed no clues, and say they had no suspects, or persons of interest. Police have used polygraph, forensics, and other experts from the FBI, and other agencies to no avail. When the case started, one of them that was the most repeated, was of her uncle having something to do with her disappearance, and murder. It was Chalisa's uncle, Reinbold, who lived in the same neighborhood on Cogian Avenue. He said, Lewis had lived both with her mother, Strickland, and her grandmother, Anita Bueso. But for about 6 months before she was killed, she was with her grandma. According to investigators, Lewis' uncle, Reinbold, was working in Port Orchard the day Lewis disappeared, and her mother, Lisa Strickland, was on her way to Bremerton from Yakima when their daughter was abducted. But no physical evidence was ever found by them. The other thing that has come out was that apparently the pastor at her church possibly knew it. Lewis was also a member of the Lincoln Avenue Bible Church. Her youth pastor, Philip Morris. It was reported that during the months before her death, she would regularly went to the church, at which was heavily involved in church activities. Her pastor Morris seemed to be particularly shaken by Lewis's death. It was only 3 months ago that Lewis, beset with problems, confided in him. She wasn't the bubbly girl he was accustomed to, rather a girl with grave spiritual questions. Her pastor said. At one point, detectives had a person of interest, but they were not able to build evidence to make that person a solid suspect. One more thing had been found inside her backpack. It was a diary that Lewis left before she disappeared, in which she wrote, "Dear God, I know you have a reason for everything, and it all works out in the long run, but I just don't get it." It was clear that the diary Lewis left was implying as to some issue that affected her life, which had something to do with her disappearance. I'm starting to lean more toward that possibility, but for some unknown reason, they didn't think it was significant enough to be processed as evidence. But as the years went by, the case quickly went cold. The great tragedy of this case to me is that it's not better known, and frankly it should be solved. I mean, it just should be. A lot of people had left town since then also, even Lewis' family had left. Her mother is now in Spokane, and her grandmother, whom Lewis lived with, moved to Montana. and there are other people today who knew her, who simply can't remember that far back, so all this further makes things more difficult. And to this day, it's been almost 3 decades. There are still more questions than answers, when it comes to 14-year-old Chalisa Kim Lewis. Unbeknownst to people, exactly who was behind her death.